Howdy Moz fans, and welcome to another edition of Whiteboard Friday. This week we're going to chat a little bit about presentation creation and presentation delivery. Why? Well, because so many of us as marketers need to go and make pitches to our teams, to our clients, to our companies, and externally. My experience has been that an overwhelming majority of marketers have some interest in being able to give great public talks. And so I want to help you do that today. I want to help you feel less uncomfortable. And look, these are techniques that I've used to, generally speaking, upgrade and do well with my presentations. I think you'll find a lot of these apply to you as well. The first one is really important. So this is basically when I deliver information here on Whiteboard Friday, one of the things that you might notice is that I try deliberately not to present stuff that is super obvious and already well known throughout the industry. My goal is really to say, hey, what is something that less than 20% of the audience who's going to be watching Whiteboard Friday is already aware of? Now let me try and present that information. Because it's really not interesting. If the tips that I gave you today, for example, were things like, work on your disfluencies so that you don't stutter and say make sure you practice the night before. Make sure that your font is at least 30-point type. You should turn off this video. It's not that it's bad advice. It's fine advice. It's even good advice. But you already know it. And so it's annoying to have to listen to it again and again. This is true in your presentations as well. And so many folks, when they're asked to give a talk about something in the web marketing space, start with the fundamentals and the basics, the things that everybody already knows or that are so intuitive that they're just not that helpful. And look, when you see something that, let's say this is a conversion rate optimization presentation. And so my little friend over here, Bob, the not so good presenter, is giving a talk, and he's got this slide called Make Clear Calls to Action. Right? And then he shows like an ugly thing where you can't really see what the call to action is, and one that's a very clear call to action. Super obvious advice. Advice that anyone who has done any degree of optimization around conversion rates knows and learned years ago. This presentation, unless it is to someone who has no experience with web marketing, is probably going to put you to sleep or drive you to get on your phone or go out of the room. On the other hand, this is something I caught today from Joanna Wiebe on Copy Hackers. Test text link calls to action versus buttons on your mobile sites in particular. Oh, really? Text link calls to action? I would think a button would convert better. But it turns out there's some data out there that suggests that in some cases, it looks like the text link works better. You better try it. Maybe that's something to add to your testing repertoire in the future. Aha! That is new information. I did not know that before, right? So this obvious information turns people off. It makes you disconnect from the presentation. This new information, new, non-obvious, it's awesome. It's heaven. That's what we're all looking for when we try and get content. This is not just true, by the way, for presentations. It's particularly powerful for presentations, but this is true of virtually any content you create that is designed to be educational or informative. Second, never show multiple elements of information on a slide before you talk about them. Unfortunately, I can't do that with Whiteboard Friday. So Whiteboard Friday, all the information's already up there. You could read ahead. I'm going to count on you not to, but in a presentation, this gets so annoying, and it really distracts from a speaker when they put up a slide like this. Here's the different public relations channels that you should test, and they've got them listed out. And the person, right, Bob, my bad presenter, is talking about number 1, but what are we all doing? We're all reading number 4. We're all reading ahead. We're like, yeah, Bob, we already know you put up the slide, so we've read ahead. We don't care what you have to say about 1 through 4. Like, we're disconnecting. Instead, Bob could do one of two things. Either he could show only 1 and not show 2, 3, and 4, and then animate in, right? Animate in 2, 3, and 4. Like, here, I'm going to talk about this one, and now we're done talking about that, and look, here's number 2. Now we're going to start talking about that one. Or, and I like this way better because you just get so much more room to be visual and to present something well, you can say, hey, we're going to talk about 4 public relations channels you should test. Slide 1 shows off number 1. And maybe I can call it out specifically. I'm going to show you Product Hunt, and I'm going to show you how submission works, and I'm going to show you how the voting systems work, and how people try to game it and it doesn't work, and da-da-da-da-da. That is a great way to go. Now I go to slide 2. That shows the next piece of information. I can't tell you the percentage of presenters who screw this up and show, a list of bullet points, God forbid, or even just this visual system where they put all the information that they're going to talk about for 5 minutes on one slide. It just kills it, makes us all read ahead and destroys the drama and the attention. Third one, try, if you possibly can, when you're speaking to an audience, try to customize your example specifically to them rather than saying, hey, I'm just going to take a broad approach. I know this is tough. I struggle with this myself because I give presentations over and over again. But what I'm generally urging you to do is to find intersections of one of 3 things. Things that are highly relevant to your audience. That could be relevant in terms of it's relevant to their professional work or to the website or the organization they work with. It could be relevant to their geography. I find that this works tremendously well when I go places and I have examples that are specific to their geography, like I was speaking in Raleigh recently, Raleigh, North Carolina, which is near Duke University in Durham, and they have the Duke Lemur Center. I actually went and visited the Lemur Center, and I got to see lots of awesome lemurs jumping around. Very cool, right? So I talked about this in my presentation in Raleigh, which got people like, wow, cool, and they were tweeting about it. It was great. Or shared passions, right? Things that you share in common. We have a collective love of, grilling steak. And so I am going to talk about grilling steak because I think that's an example that could be relevant and speaks to many people. Apologies to my vegetarian and vegan friends out there. These examples can be done in a bunch of ways, right? You can do them with like your search queries that you might show off. You can do them with good versus bad practices that you might be showing off. You can do it just as a pure visual tool, right? If you have geographic stuff that is relevant to the area you're in and you need visuals for your presentation, that's a good way to go. Social accounts that you're doing, content examples that you're doing, whatever it is, you can make it relevant to that audience. Make it feel like there's some resonance. Make it feel like you cared enough to change up or to customize your presentation to speak to them specifically. Just one caveat of this, don't pander. Be very cautious against pandering or against assuming that you understand something, right? So if I'm going to a foreign country and I know very little about it, I don't assume, I just say, hey, I looked up things to do in, Milan or in Venice, and I found this particular art show, and so I went there and here was my experience around it, rather than saying, oh, well, I know you Italians love pasta, and so, right, like, don't assume, don't pander. Careful about getting generic or racist. Number 4, in your presentations, try to create conflict. I know a lot of us have conflict avoidance, but what you want to do is you want to create a storyline people can pay attention to, that they care about, that they're interested in, and that means if you can craft your story or even some part of your presentation, right, to have a villain, a hero, and a struggle between them. And these can be metaphorical heroes and villains. We don't literally need like Darth Vader and Luke, right? From there, we can follow that classic story arc where we introduce the characters, we talk about the conflict and introduce that. We make the case of why the hero is winning or should win against the villain, or what the hero can do or what the hero did do. And then we suggest action or close out with some recommendation around our presentation to help make it actionable. Villains can be a lot of things. Villains can be a lack of data. It could be poor communication. Villains could be unmotivated people on a team or people who don't care about your problem. They could be a crap strategy, or a literal villain, like a competitor or a market behemoth in your field, right? All those kinds of things. Heroes could be tools. They could be your team or you yourself. They could be a new process. A hero could be an organization, or hopefully something that people can cheer for, right? That they want to get and be like, oh man, I want to see the Duke Lemur Center have lots of success because lemurs are adorable and they're endangered. And like, nobody doesn't cheer for lemurs. Okay, lemur, good hero, bad villain, FYI. Give actionable takeaways. All right, number 5 is give actionable takeaways. If you can, avoid broad, generic advice. And I see presenters do this in virtually every field, right? They get up on stage and they talk about, hey, here was this problem. Maybe they even do a great job with creating that conflict, and they talk about, and then they get to their suggestions section, their takeaways, right? And it is, better communication is good. You should work on better communication. What are you telling me? How does that help me? Versus, I saw this great piece a couple days ago on Twitter. It was a talk that was given, I think it was at First Round Capital or Open View Venture Partners, about radical candor. And what was great about it was that they had, the woman who was giving it had drawn a diagram of how when you combine caring personally about the people on your team with challenging them directly, you get this radical candor, right? It's both empathetic and very transparent. And that improves communication. So now you've not told me to do this, you've told me how to do it. And you've shown me the terrible ways not to do it, like don't not care personally, but do challenge directly. That's just obnoxious, aggressive behavior, right? And don't just care personally, but not challenge directly. That's ruinous empathy. So great examples all across here. I like this format, right? If you can fill in these blanks, I think you're going to have success here. You used to do X, but after I share Y, you'll switch to doing Z and get better results, right? You'll use Y to do Z and get better results than what you were getting with X. If you can answer this sentence, you're going to be in great shape. Great shape. Okay, number 6, last one here. I try to always assume knowledge rather than assuming that people don't know something. One of the things that I found is that as I'm giving a presentation, if I start to explain the deep technical aspects of something without just assuming that my audience knows it or that they can get by without it, that it gets boring. It gets boring fast. And the presentation moves slowly, and it's not fun to listen to. It's annoying. So what I've started doing over the last few years is essentially assuming that knowledge, but then calling it out specifically. So let's say I'm presenting a slide like this, talking about how pogo sticking, right, long clicks versus short clicks and that kind of stuff, could be hurting your site on SEO. And then I'll say, is anyone in the audience not familiar, hasn't heard of pogo sticking before? Just raise your hand, look around. If there's a few hands that go up, I'll say, oh, okay, great. Let me give a brief explanation. What I've done there is not, even when I am speaking to an audience where I'm confident, highly confident that 90% or 70% of the audience has never heard of pogo sticking because they're not deep into SEO or whatever, I still do this. And the reason is that 30% who does know what it is, they are way more understanding, way more empathetic, way more welcoming of a discussion that takes 2 or 3 minutes for me about what pogo sticking is after I've called it out, like, hey, are there people who don't know? And then they see fellow audience members and they're like, oh, good. Well, it's good that he's explaining it to everyone, and I appreciate that. As opposed to like, oh, God, he's going to drone on about this thing that I've already heard 10 times, and I totally know what it is. Why is he wasting my time? It's about creating that relationship with the audience and between the audience members to draw in that empathy and to keep that presentation flowing. All right, gang, hopefully you've enjoyed these. And I actually have a list of a bunch more for you in another blog post that I'm going to share at the end of this Whiteboard Friday. So you can check that out. It has some of my presentation hacks for getting better scores. And we will see you again next week for another edition of Whiteboard Friday. Take care.